Hello everyone, hope you're having a wonderful day. What keeps a home steady without trapping it? A door locked for a year, or left just wide enough for breath? Today we follow Diep, James and little Nye as a 6-month decision reshapes their future. A trowel seals more than a floor, and a grandmother's quiet choice turns a room into family. Stay with us from the first 5 seconds. Small actions open big doors. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. A door clicks and the next 6 months find their shape. James keeps his voice low as the call connects. Diep steadies the phone with both hands. The warehouse smells like dust and old rope, the kind that leaves a dry taste on the tongue. They give the owner their names, they give him the reason. The case is simple, the location fits, the timing needs air. 6 months, James says, so the market can breathe. A pause, then a clean reply. Rent for 6, review at 5, extend if steady. Risk changes posture. It squats where they can lift it. The air lifts too. If you had to choose, what length holds a family steady without trapping it? They end the call without cheering, just to nod. Diep lets her grip loosen and pockets the phone. The door they just locked is not the metal one in front of them, but they both glance at the real door anyway. It sits ajar, a bright strip cutting the concrete like a ruler. James sketches the next page aloud. Contract, procurement, operations, presence before growth. Reputation first, Diep adds. When it's clean and fair, sellers find you. He agrees. 6 months is enough to prove, and enough to exit if weather turns. They face the floor. Cement, water, a trowel. The scrape is a patient sound like sharpening a promise. If you press wrong, it peels, Diep says. She shows the angle with her wrist. Firm, smooth. Seal the seam so rain has no fingernails to pry with. James tries. The blade whispers. The surface learns to lie flat. He wants to rush. He slows down. Let me finish, he says. And he does, stroke by steady stroke. The room rearranges around their breath. What small action today keeps tomorrow from leaking back in? Across the room, Diep clears space. Light items to the far corner. Pathways open. A knock. John edges in, steps careful over the bucket. His voice keeps the dust from jumping. Need help? Yes, Diep answers, short and clear. Shift this corner there. He moves what is asked, not more. They keep the floor open for what comes next. Water is poured into glasses. Please have some. John drinks, thanks them again for letting him help. He mentions the wood he gave earlier is enough. Diep smiles, a plain thanks leaves the favor where it belongs. Some gifts are for a season, some are for a reason. Not everything cycles back at once. I'm still sick, but she can't feel it. The trowel's scrape returns, even, durable. Diep kneels and taps the edges that still need mortar. Here, and here. She refuses gaps. She refuses the idea that water is inevitable. James adjusts his pressure. The base holds. A corner darkens as the cement drinks. The clock doesn't shout, it just walks. They reach the point where the sound in a room becomes a map. Work nears completion. Cleanup waits like a last chore after dinner. They split tasks because splitting works. He takes the buckets, she coils the cord. He wipes the blade, she folds the tarp. Small chores, big meaning. If trust is a flaw, which seam do you seal first? Money, time, or voice? They stop to breathe. The door is still ajar. That bright strip across the concrete has widened as the sun turns. The space looks like a space you can bring real work into. No theatrics, no speeches, Foundations laid by two sets of hands. Help when asked for, no more than needed. The phone in Diep's pocket buzzes once, then stills. She does not check it. She looks at the seam under the rack and presses it flat with the heel of her palm. A reminder lives in the muscle. Keep rain out, keep heat in, keep paths clear. I can carry this part, but only if you see me doing it. Clean up ends. The room quiets. A voice lands from the doorway. Diep. It's even. It's familiar. Nai's grandmother sits, palms resting on her knees, back straight like someone who earned her chairs by scrubbing them. She says she has been watching for a while. She spoke with Diep. She spoke with Nai. She checked what needed checking. A breath. Then the pivot placed like a key on a table. Today I decide to let Nai stay with the two of you. The sentence does not crash. It settles. It doesn't need to be repeated to be believed. What proves a home? Paper, routine, or the way a child breathes when she sleeps? Diep thanks her. She keeps the center where it belongs. The point isn't who Nai stays with, she says. The point is that she is happy and well cared for. The grandmother nods. Access is agreed without fuss. She can visit often. In the summer, she can take Nai to spend time with family. The sound of sharing lands heavier than the sound of any door. James listens with his hands open. He knows the weight of locked. He knows when a gate should close and when it should stay open. This one stays open. The bright strip on the floor hums. At the 7-minute mark of any hard decision, what do you notice first? Your fear loosening or your hands? They invite her to stay for a meal. She accepts. They agreed to pick Nai up together that afternoon. In the fresh order of the room, the decision feels like the final brick tapped into place. The 6-month contract outside is business. Today's decision is home. Both are reputation. With sellers, you prove by paying fair and showing up. With a child, you prove by being there and staying there. The door remains open. A meal waits. Later, the school corridor will hear 3 sets of steps in a rope of rhythm. For now, there is only the quiet work of setting bowls, washing hands, and laying chopsticks side by side. If you show up tomorrow, what door actually opens? The strip of light slides another inch. It touches the line they just sealed and glows there like a small promise. Not too short to shatter, not too long to trap. Room for weather, room for breath. Room for a child's backpack on a hook by the door. James reaches for the switch. He hesitates, then leaves the door as it is. Open enough to invite, narrow enough to hold. Diep nods once, as if measuring the width with her eyes. They turn toward the kitchen, toward the work that looks like rest, toward the rest that looks like work. The floor will cure. The plan will begin. Afternoon leans warm on the road as they walk toward the school. The dust is soft like chalk rubbed into a palm. James slows near the gate. Diep quickens without noticing. The grandmother keeps the pace of someone who prefers to arrive composed. The corridor smells like paper, detergent, and the faint sugar of a snack box forgotten under a desk. Children burst and bend like starlings in the yard. Then one voice slices clean through the rest. "Mama!" Nai's small legs run, knees high, hair flying. She stops short, like she remembers the rule about shoes on the line, then forgets it and dives into Diep's midsection. What do you hold first, your child's weight or your breath? Diep kneels, her arms close. James's hand lands on Nai's shoulder like a landing bird. The grandmother's face does a small thing. The muscles around the eyes loosen. Nye talks without commas, snack time, a drawing, a song with claps. She pulls a folded paper from her bag. The drawing shows 3 stick figures holding a long rectangle. "It's our door," she says, proud. "Open so air can come in." Prop comes back like it never left. James lifts the corner of the paper and grins. "Good design," he says. The teacher waves, then approaches with a careful smile. "Nye has been bright today," she says. Steady, curious. She glances at the grandmother, at Diep, at James, and lets the triangle breathe. "I was afraid this morning. It didn't walk in with me." They take Nye's bag. The grandmother asks about homework with the straightforwardness of someone who will supervise it herself one day. A small cloud shifts. For a second, the air cools. "Form," the teacher says, almost apologetically. "Guardian's signature on the new contact sheet." She holds out a clipboard. The corridor's quiet sounds sharpen, sandals, pages, the scratch of chalk somewhere far. Diep reaches, then pauses, then looks at the grandmother. The pause is one beat too long. Something fragile presses against the inside of a sentence. What breaks first in a family? Paper, pride, or the habit of asking? The grandmother steps in. "Give it to her," she says. No emphasis, no ceremony. The teacher understands more than the hallway hears. She passes the pen. Diep signs. The ink stays. The teacher nods. James exhales through his nose. Nye watches the line become a name and taps the paper twice, as if calling it awake. The fragile thing decides not to break today. The corridor hums again. The bell rings for another class. Shoes hiss across tile. The moment moves from sharp to warm. I thought I needed permission. I needed witness. They walk home under a sky that pretends it never rained. On the table, bowls wait. Steam lifts and curls around the room's clean edges. The grandmother sits where the light lands without glare. Nye narrates each bite like a sportscaster. James reaches for the sauce, then stops, then passes it to the grandmother first. She takes it and passes it to Diep. The small choreography settles a larger question. After the meal, they wash bowls shoulder to shoulder. Nye hums. The grandmother dries a plate and turns it in her hands like checking a moon for cracks. At the sink, James's voice goes low. "Thank you," he says, not specifying which decision earns it. The grandmother nods. She looks at the door, still open the same measured width. "Sometimes a door open like that," she says, "keeps a house steadier than a locked one." No one answers, no one needs to. Nye tugs her sleeve. "Grandma," she says, "can we plant the door in my notebook?" The grandmother smiles. "We can." What piece of wood belongs to everyone? Threshold, table, or the toy box lid you fix twice. Evening finds the warehouse again. They carry the contract back to the table and square the corners. The air smells less like dust now and more like an idea beginning to warm up. James draws a timeline on the back of a receipt. Week 1, procurement. Week 2, shelving. Week 3, soft opening if supplies permit. Diep lists seller names, the ones who have promised to come by if trust holds. The grandmother adds one contact from a cousin who knows a rice wholesaler. The list grows. It doesn't sprawl. It knows where it's going. A knock. John again. He stands at the door jamb, not crossing, until someone says, "I brought those invoices I mentioned," he murmurs. Diep waves him in. He lays the papers flat, eyes on the corners, every line aligned as if that makes numbers behave. James checks 2 figures. They match. John moves to go. Nye appears with her drawing and thrusts it up like a flag. "We drew a door," she says. John blinks, smiles, then points to the real one. "Leave it like that," he says. "Helps the floor cure." Small advice, big echo. I still want to repay kindness with gifts. Today I repay it by listening. Night settles early like it has been invited. The warehouse takes on that soft, metallic ring rooms get when they are ready for work. James tapes the contract to a clip on the wall. Diep takes a photo. The grandmother checks her phone for the last bus and shakes her head. "I'll stay tonight," she says. "You two need an early start." The sentence lands on the table and refuses to apologize for being generous. What does staying mean when leaving is still possible? Climax sidles in without drums. It takes the shape of Knee brushing her teeth in a new corner, legs swinging off a crate. It takes the shape of Diep pausing in the doorway, watching a grandmother braid hair loose enough not to pull. It takes the shape of James staring at the strip of light that has now thinned into a line on the floor. He walks to the door. He considers closing it. He does not. He widens it the smallest possible degree. Air moves. A moth lifts from somewhere near the ceiling and finds the night. I will not shut the thing that keeps us breathing. They lay out thin mats. The grandmother sleeps closest to Nye. Diep lies where she can see the door and the wall with the contract. James lies where he can see their faces when the streetlight shifts. The warehouse is not a home. It doesn't need to be yet. It is a room becoming honest about its purpose. The floor holds. The seams do not weep. Somewhere after midnight, rain tests the roof, then passes. The sound touches the sealed line and decides to keep moving. Morning arrives like a hand placed on a shoulder. They boil water, they pour tea. They stand in the doorway in turns. Sellers begin to text. A cousin calls. A price lands lower than expected. A first delivery nervously commits to a time. The day starts to take its positions. Before they split, Nye tugs Diep's sleeve again. "Mama?" she asks. "When the door is big enough, can everyone fit?" Diep kneels so they share a horizon. "Big enough," she says, "and still the right width." What size of open keeps love from spilling and work from stalling? They lock nothing they don't have to. They open only what they can keep. The rectangle of light on the floor is not a metaphor today. It is where shoes will line up, where bags will drop, where small feet will practice tying laces. It is where first goods will cross in, then out. It is where stories will leave one body and enter another without getting lost. The strip widens with the sun and thins with the evening and returns the next morning without being asked. A quiet promise, a measured width, a way to belong. The last look is simple. James glances at the contract. Diep checks the seam near the rack. The grandmother folds a towel on the line. Nye bumps the door with her hip as she runs, and the door moves half an inch and then finds its angle again. It's enough. It's open. It holds. In the end, nothing grand changed, and everything did. A door stayed open the right width. A 6-month choice found its spine. A trowel pressed seams until water had nowhere to enter. A grandmother's calm yes turned care into belonging, and Knee's drawing taught the room how to breathe. Work will start, rain will test, days will stack, but tonight the floor holds, the contract hangs straight, and 4 people share one table without forcing it. That's how homes are built. One measured opening, one kept promise, one steady hand at a time. If this chapter moved you, tap like and subscribe to follow the next steps of Diep, James and Nye. And tell us in the comments which moment gripped your heart: the quiet signature, the strip of light on the floor, or the simple choice to leave the door open.